Welcome to B&W Insights, a taste of industry news. I'm your host, Mark Siefert. In today's episode, we're going to explore the latest news in the world of lead, from material inventories to replacement plans. It's been 10 years since the Flint water crisis, and no one in the water industry thought this is where we'd be in 10 years. From lead service line inventories, replacement plans, sampling changes, varying regulations around the country. Stick around for our discussion with Kaitlin Wright, where we dive into the future of lead and how we can help. Ready? Let's get started. Thank you, Kaitlin. Welcome to the show today, episode 1 of B&W Insights. How long have you been at Baxter and Woodman, and how did you get started in lead?
So good to see you, Mark. I've been with Baxter and Woodman 10 years now, doing water, sewer design. But when it came to lead, I would say early on, I knew that this was going to impact the rest of my career. Honestly, I knew that it was going to be a huge impact for communities. This was something that we weren't ready for. So I wanted to help communities, and to say it was close to home is also an understatement. I have a lead service line.
Well, that's good. I mean, you have a lead service line, and you mentioned that, we weren't ready for this. But why are we talking about this? Why are we talking about lead?
The simple answer, it's a neurotoxin. It's incredibly impactful on our development for our children. And there's no safe exposure level to lead. So
Right.
The only way to really reduce that risk is remove sources of lead. And what we're doing now is trying to identify where that lead is and then figure out what we need to do to replace it.
So many years ago, the original lead laws came out of the Clean Water Act. What sorts of changes have come since the Clean Water Act to today? I mean, that was over 40 years ago, the Clean Water Act. What happened?
It's been evolving. So in 1986, Congress amended the Safe Drinking Water Act. So yes, it's been every bit of 40 years. And that was really the first time our industry put a hard, firm stop to saying we're not using lead anymore
Right.
for plumbing fixtures, piping, solder, etc. But fast forward to 1991, that's when the lead and copper rule was first published. That's when our industry started to go, okay, let's take a look at the water and do we have lead in it? That's when we started testing for lead in our water. In 2012, 2011, I believe, is when they did a Lead Reduction Act, basically building on that lead and copper rule, but it was to reduce lead in lead-free plumbing fixtures. And then now fast forward to December of 2020, and we have the lead and copper rule revisions.
And so all those changes have happened. But let's take a step back and explain to the listeners, where is lead? Where is lead in the distribution system? Where is lead? How is lead getting into the water?
That's a great question. So lead is not naturally found in our source water. You're not going to go see it in a lake or a river or groundwater. That's not commonly where we find lead. And it gets into our water through exposure to lead, to lead plumbing or piping. So water naturally has some corrosivity to it. It can then, if it's against a lead pipe, leach or pull those lead particles into the water. So where we're seeing that exposure happen is through typically lead water service lines, through lead plumbing inside of a home, lead fixtures that have lead in it. Yeah. The water distribution system, your water treatment systems, that's not where lead's getting into it. You don't have water main that's made of lead pipe, but it's the smaller diameter service lines that we're seeing this happen.
Where the water's sitting overnight when residents aren't using their water. And
yes,
most homes aren't using water 24 hours a day, so water sits in there.
Exactly.
And that's when the leaching happens. So states like Illinois, California, and New Jersey have adopted stricter lead laws. Nationally, what's the sense? What's happening nationally in some of the other states that haven't jumped on board and haven't had these stricter laws like those 3 states I mentioned have?
Right now, federally, we have the lead and copper rule revisions. So that is mandating every other state outside of the 3 that you've listed to basically create an inventory, identify what service line materials they have in their community, And then from there, if they find lead, if they find galvanized that has been in contact with lead, or even if they are unable to determine the material of a service line, they have to develop a plan to next steps. Or what are we doing to replace these? What do we do if we have an exceedance on our sampling? So every state's responding to that, even Illinois. So for instance, we do have our own laws here in Illinois, but we've also adopted the federal law. So we're constantly kind of looking to that federal law for guidance.
It's evolving daily, as you'd say.
Yes, very much so.
So the final lead service inventory and replacement plan that you mentioned in your last question is due October 6th, 2024.
October 16th, yep.
16th, 2024. What should utilities be doing now? We're right now sitting about 4 or 5 months out. What should people be doing? Is this time to scramble? Do they still have time?
Hopefully they're not scrambling, but if they haven't started their inventory, they absolutely need to be starting that at this point. I would hope that most communities at this point are getting a sense of what do they have in town. And by that I mean, where are their service lines located? Every single service line needs to be identified by address or a unique identifier, like a billing code or something to that effect. And then the material of that service line, both kind of what's deemed public, so typically what's within right-of-way, and then what's deemed private, what's on private property. The material of both of those need to be identified. So if communities haven't started that process, now's the time.
Now's the time. We're not waiting any longer.
No, don't wait any longer. And then for communities that have already identified that they have lead in town, or they've identified that they've got galvanized in town, they should also be taking advantage of this time to start their replacement plans. Where communities maybe are really positive that they don't have lead in town or they don't have galvanized requiring replacement in town, they might push that limit a little bit more on do they need to develop the plan or not. So for those communities, really making sure they hammer out their material inventory over the next few months, that's pretty critical.
So with the material inventory, we definitely have to get inside residents' homes and we have to see what type of material is. What's an easy way to tell if it's a lead pipe or not?
So lead, I mean, if you're looking at lead versus copper, it's pretty identifiable. Copper, you've got that bronzy kind of rich orange color. But when we start looking at lead versus, say, a galvanized pipe, both are gray, but you can take a magnet. A magnet will stick to galvanized pipe.
Okay.
It's not going to stick to lead. You could take something like a quarter or a screwdriver, and if you scratch that pipe, lead's going to flake off. It's very soft metal, and it becomes shiny as you scrape it off. Galvanized, you're really not going to do much to that pipe.
Right.
So,
You're not going to put an indention or scratch it. In terms of the replacement plans, right now I know the federal law has some replacement guidelines. What are those? And what should people be planning for in the replacement plans?
So underneath federal regulations, you're really wanting to figure out your public education kind of pieces. How are you going to be communicating to residents? They want to plan for that. The other piece here is you have to create goals within your community on your replacements based off of your sampling results. So if a community exceeds what is called a trigger level, which is being introduced underneath this new federal law, and that's 10 parts per billion, you have to introduce a goal for replacement. How many service lines are you going to replace annually until you've addressed that exceedance of the trigger level? And then they also have introduced a requirement to replace 3% per year if you exceed the action level. So in your plan, you need to come up with your plan on how do you facilitate that? What 3% are you doing every single year? How are you choosing for it?
The biggest question of the day.
So that's ultimately what the plan is for. It's supposed to be a guidebook for communities. They want to see communities being organized and thoughtful on this, and helping them kind of make that come to fruition in the coming years.
And your answer to that question led me right into my next question about public education. But I want to take a step back real quick. Galvanized pipe, you've mentioned it a couple times now.
Yeah.
Why are we replacing galvanized? We talk and say lead's what's bad. Lead's the issue.
It's a great question. So,
why are we touching galvanized? Why do we have to replace it?
So galvanized pipe, if you were to take and look inside of a galvanized pipe versus, say, like a copper pipe, the internal portion of that pipe is pretty rough. So if it's been downstream of a lead pipe, so what I mean by that is if we're thinking of a water main out in the street, We're talking about the service line running into the house. If the portion of the service line closest to the water main is lead, and then it switches to galvanized towards the home, that galvanized pipe is now downstream of lead.
Okay.
In that situation, lead could have leached out, pulled out of that lead pipe, and gone into that galvanized pipe and gotten stuck inside of the galvanized pipe.
So the galvanized pipe is actually grabbing lead that potentially could have gone down the line.
Yeah.
All right. So that's a good reason why, as we look at galvanized downstream of lead.
Yes.
Awesome. Public education, you touched on in your last answer, and it's vital in this ever-changing landscape.
Yeah.
Why is it so important? Why is it so important we talk to our residents and our consumers?
So we have a tendency in our industry to only communicate with residents when something's going wrong. You're issuing a boil order. You are having to shut down the water main for a break. Maybe there's an upcoming project. So you're improving the system, but most residents aren't really happy that you're digging up their street to make that happen. So with lead, we don't want the only dialogue to be something bad. I mean, you think back to Flint, Michigan. Anyone who hears lead and they hear Flint, it's not, no one gets...
The warm and fuzzies?
No, yeah, there's no warm and fuzzies on that. This is an opportunity for communities to build trust. You don't want your residents going to, any source on the web to figure out, is lead in water bad?
So residents should not be Googling, is lead bad? Listen to your water providers and listen to the things that are coming from the federal and the state governments.
Yeah, there's a lot of different avenues for information nowadays, and communities can use this as an opportunity to engage with their residents, explain how they treat their water. Are they adding polyphosphates? Mm-hmm. Is there a corrosion control system in place that would really maybe eliminate that concern for residents? Have they never had an issue with sampling for lead in that town? So these are opportunities to communicate early.
And often.
And then for residents that do have lead service lines, myself included, there's potentially a large expense or at least an inconvenience for those residents, and helping them be prepared for that in the coming years is going to be important.
Yeah. You've been talking to many communities. You've been hitting the road. You're talking to boards. What's some of the best ways you've seen utilities communicate to their stakeholders?
I don't think that there's a one-size-fits-all, nor do I think that we should limit ourselves to a one-size-fits-all. We tend to just communicate to residents with sending out letters, and that's kind of the end-all, be-all for the industry. I've seen communities develop videos. I think that's phenomenal. There's one community, they interviewed their local plumber and had him do an explanation on the different materials and how to test it. I've seen communities do social media posts, infographics. Basically, any way to engage residents is going to be important. Letters are great. They should still be used.
But you want that interpersonal connection. I've seen communities going out there, and anytime there's a civic event in their community, have a booth.
Yep.
Put your water operator, put your public works director, somebody from the village or the city out there and talk to the residents. Let them ask questions.
I think that's great.
Yeah. So sampling, we touched on it early. It's coming. The changes are coming.
It's coming. For some, it's already started.
Yeah. What are they and how are they going to affect utilities? I know they're going to have a financial impact. What's going on?
So we're going from a single 1 liter sample to needing to test 5 1-liter samples. So if you thought getting your residents to engage on taking one sample was difficult, we're now asking them fill up 5 bottles simultaneously. So there's a whole education piece there and making sure residents are doing that appropriately. The introduction of the trigger level, which I kind of alluded to earlier, is going to be new. So not only do you have the action level at 15 parts per billion, but if communities exceed the trigger level at 10 parts per billion.
At their 90th percentile at 10.
Their 90th percentile, that's going to introduce a lot of public education, some corrosion control studies, things of that nature.
And where and when are these changes taking place? Is this Illinois specific, this nationwide, and when is this really going into place?
So all communities across the country are going to have to start taking this into account starting next year. In Illinois specifically, they have said that if you are having to do sampling the back 6 months of 24, you should be operating underneath the new requirements. But everyone else across the country will start next year.
in the water wastewater industry, we are known for having abbreviations. You have to memorize them all. You have to know them. LCRI, what is it?
Lead and copper rule improvements. So we're operating right now underneath the lead and copper rule revisions, LCRR, and that becomes our compliance date for that is October 16th.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't enough. The US EPA identified that there was some kind of gaps in that law and they wanted to strengthen it. So they've introduced or proposed the lead and copper rule improvements, LCRI, that went out for public comment back in February. They're currently making revisions to that, and we are expecting to see that finalized by October this year.
Mm-hmm.
That could potentially create some massive shifts across the country. We expect that if it's finalized October this year, compliance will be required by October of 27.
Wow. So there's potentially more changes coming down the road.
Yes, absolutely.
With that, what advice are you giving utilities to keep track of these changes? You're talking more changes potentially in 6 months. Over the last 40 years, we've had a slew of changes. How do we keep track of all this?
Making those connections with industry experts, right? Getting involved with your American Water Works Association. I would say attending any sort of webinars or conferences where you see that lead's being presented on. We're all trying to stay up to date on this.
Mm-hmm.
Networking even within your public works kind of community. Other communities might be doing something slightly different than you, but there's an opportunity there.
Nice. So in Northern Illinois, we're seeing prices between $15,000 and $20,000 per service line. It's a lot of money, especially if you're over 100, over 200, over 300 lead service lines. What funding mechanisms are you seeing that are becoming available in Illinois and across the country, really? Because this is going to be a large expense for municipalities who haven't planned for this.
Yeah, this is literally the $1 million question. Across the country, it's the $1 billion question. So communities right now in all the different regulations, whether it's the state regulations or federal, there's nothing in the law that says a community has to finance that entire replacement. So there's a lot of communities that are looking to do some sort of cost share program, putting a little bit of that financial onus back on the property owner. But then in terms of looking for funding sources, really the best avenue is the state revolving funds. So federally, they've allocated $15 billion, I think $20 billion now. They did kind of two different pools of money. That's going to be generated or sent down through each state's revolving fund. So utilizing your state's revolving fund, there's usually a loan program with that.
Correct.
They're operating typically a 49% principal forgiveness that's kind of generated from federal requirements. So there's potential that the loan could have a principal forgiveness piece there. Other communities are looking at congressionally directed funds.
Okay.
So that's an opportunity as well. There's community block grants as well, but I would say state revolving fund is kind of the best avenue.
So there's really multiple different avenues for municipalities and utilities to get funding. So if they don't get one, they could apply for many.
Correct.
This is going to be something we're looking at for the next 15 years, 20 years, 30 years. What's the time frame again?
Possibly even shorter.
Possibly even shorter, so there's potential changes.
Shorter. Yes. So right now, underneath federal law, communities are only going to have to start doing replacements if their 90th percentile exceeds the action level. But that LCRI, right now, if they have not made changes, it's proposed that communities will have to start replacing every 10 years, replacing all their service lines within 10 years.
Within 10 years. Wow, that's a tight time frame. Yes. Especially for communities who have large numbers. They're really going to have to get this funding settled relatively quickly. Yeah,
it's going to be a massive impact.
What's next on the horizon for you in terms of lead?
I think there's really two big conversations. Ultimately, sampling. We've seen that be something that's not discussed as regularly right now. I think everyone's really focused on the inventories, the replacement plans, but sampling is going to impact communities' operations. There's a financial component there that they need to plan for, public engagement piece. So making sure that communities are kind of up to speed on that and ready for it. And then I would say the elephant in the room is the replacements that are coming. And there's multiple pieces to that. I mean, how are you funding it? What are you replacing? Where's the funding coming from? What's the process going to be? There's a lot of different kind of community departments that are going to get involved in this. You've got your permitting, you've got your water, you've got your public works, you've got probably community development involved. I mean, we want to get that process hammered out now before we get to a place where you actually have to start replacing.
Nice. Well, thank you for spending some time in the studio with us today. Lead is a super interesting topic. It is relevant right now, and it's going to be relevant for the next few years. Yeah. How can we help? Is there anything that Baxter Women's offering where we can help with the community? I know you're going out talking to everyone. Where are we going to see you in the next few months talking lead?
So I don't think there's any piece that we're not helping communities with at this point. We've done inventories, we've done replacement plans, we're helping going after funding. I'm really passionate about public education. We've got a great team in-house that can create some really awesome videos for your community to educate them. So that piece, Baxter and Woodman can help you on all of it, whatever you need. If you just want to talk through kind of what you think you need to do, I'm more than happy to have that conversation. And then in terms of kind of where you'll see us in the future, we've got I've got a few webinars in the coming months, one in December through ISA WWA, and then I will also be presenting at ISA WWA's 2-day water conference
for the
in
Illinois
September.
section.
Correct.
But I'm sure other states can find you on these webinars and
Yes.
other American Water Works associations.
Yes.
So thank you once again. Thanks for listening to today's podcast. If you have any questions or any ideas for future podcasts, reach out to us. For our entire team here at Baxter Woodman, look out for what's on the menu next.